What's up everyone, and welcome to another Rust electrical tutorial. I'm Austin, and today I'm going to be talking about understanding active usage. I think for new players, and definitely for players new to electricity, the relationship between active usage in batteries and the root power sources are sometimes a problem. And so we're going to kind of delve into that a little deeper than I normally do. Before we start, I'm going to just quickly describe what I have going on here just so you understand. I've got a power bank. This is an expanded version of what I normally build for my videos. I've just added some more solar panels, and I've added an extra wind turbine for a total of 10 root power sources. And I've got those 10 root power sources just coming into this array of root combiners, 9 of them, 10 minus 1 is 9 root combiners, and then they're just trunked together to a single output. They go through this counter to show how much root power I have coming in at any given time, and its output is running down to this little bank of branch switches that are each connected to one of these batteries, which I'll talk about here in a second. And then the output of that final branch just gives me a total amount left of my root power after I've used what I'm trying to use. So this is just kind of a nice way to really hone in efficiency in your power sources. So this or some version of this is recommended if you're getting into more complex electrical systems on your bases. So the outputs of these, like I said, are just running to each battery. So this first one, this blue line, is running to the input of this large battery. And then the orange line is running to the input of this medium battery, and this green line out of this branch out is running to the small battery. And so if you're someone who doesn't want to have to deal with active usage, you don't care, you just want your batteries to power anything you could possibly hook up to them, you can do that. And simply what you do is you look at the active usage. So this one has, you look at the max output, I should say. So if you look at the max output on this large battery, the max output is 100. And so that if you hooked up 100 rust watts worth of stuff to this battery, the active usage would say 100. And so what you can do to just skip all this all these problems is simply use the minimum charge equation, use your active usage, but just sub in the max output and calculate whatever the minimum charge or equivalence charge, you could think of it, is, and just add an extra rust watt or half a rust watt, whatever, just to keep it always above what you could possibly use it for. So as an example, with the large battery, we could take 100 times 1 divided by 0.8 is the same as 100 divided by 0.8. 100 divided by 0.8 is 125. So if you take 125, make it 126, and just send 126 to your large battery, as long as it always, on average, gets 126, it will never die, no matter what you hook up to it. You could max this thing out in every way possible if you wanted, but if you send 126 to it, it is never going to die. If you want to charge it up faster, you could send more. Say maybe you send 200 when you first set it up so that it beefs up quicker to get to its capacity. But once it's at capacity, or if you have time and safety, I guess, to let it trickle charge, you can just set it to 126, maybe 130, and then leave it alone, and you'll never have to worry about it. Same thing with the medium battery. This one has a max capacity of 9,000 rust watt minutes. So you could just, it has a max output of 50 rust watts. So if you take 50 divided by 0.8, you're going to get 62.5. So just make it 63 and send that to your medium battery, and you'll never have the battery die ever, no matter what you hook up to it, because you have accounted for that 80% charge inefficiency that rust batteries have. And then finally, same thing with a small battery. It has a max output of 10. It's very small, but if you want it to just always have the juice it needs, 10 divided by 80 or 0.8, is 12.5. So send it 13 or more, and it will also never die, no matter what. So if you're not interested in finagling your batteries and messing with the active usage and how much charge goes to them, and you have an abundance of root power that you can just simply guarantee the battery what it needs, and that's what you're going to do, then just do that. Send the minimum amount that a battery would need if it had a full amount of active usage applied. I can just show you this with the large battery. That's the blue line here. So if I set this to, hundreds doesn't matter because this thing's also pulling some active usage. We'll just set it to 101, whatever. It's going to show active usage 100. You can see how it says active usage 100 because I've pulled a lot of rust watts, more than I can actually. So if you take that 100 active usage, it's the same as the max output, you'll notice. And so 100 divided by 0.8 is 125 plus 1 is 126. So you can just do that for every single battery and then never worry about the rest again. So for those of you who are more interested in being able to fine tune maybe kind of grow as you go. Maybe you don't have the root power that you need in the beginning. You've got some root power, or you're just interested in being, really efficient all the time with what you have and manipulating power and sending it only what you need, where it needs. And so that's what we're going to do in this next section. And here, I'm just going to focus on the rest of this by using the large battery. It's no different if you use the medium battery or the small battery. Active usage doesn't change or scale in any way based on the battery. So it's the same equations, same answers, but the large battery just has a higher capacity. So I'm just going to use that one for the examples here going out. So let's say, for instance, that you have a turret. I'm just going to plunk a turret down here. And let's say you take a switch, a simple regular switch, and you hook that up to your large battery. So from your branch out, you run that to the switch. You run the switch over to here to your battery, so forth, whatever. And you have to set this up for its required rust watts. So 10 rust watts for the turret, 11 if you're going to use one of these outputs. We'll pretend we're going to use one of these outputs. So 11 I need there, 1 for this switch. So I'm going to have to set this to 12. So if I set this to 12, and I turn this on, great, I've got this turret. So let's say I turn this off, right? And so, you would come over here and look. It still says an active usage of 12. And the reason is that because I set the branch to 12, it's pulling active usage from the battery, no matter what. So let's say I don't set this to 12. Let's say I keep it at its default at 2 for now. And then I just hook up right here off of the power out instead, which is way overkill. I'm sending, this is not efficient. This is just an example. Don't do this. But let's say I send this from the power out, which the power out is a pass through, so it doesn't register active usage off of itself, if that makes sense. So right now with that switch off, you'll notice that it says an active usage of 2, and that's because of the properties of the branch itself. It draws 2. So if I were to then turn this on to turn on this turret that I did, now if I come over here and look, you'll notice that my active usage is now 13. So that's a different active usage. That's a different power requirement. So if I go back and turn this off again, then my active usage is now back to 2. So the point is, the way you manipulate your power is going to matter how you do your active usage. So let's say, and really just remember that anytime you set a branch out to a value, it's going to register active usage at that branch, at that value. That branch out is going to register no matter what. Everything after the branch out, it doesn't matter what you do. If you take, let's say you send out here, we'll set up like, maybe a couple of branches. I'll just throw a couple of branches up here. Let's say I set up 2 branches. I run this branch out to this branch here, and then this one gets daisy chained over to this branch here, and I set this to, I don't know, 25. Once I get here, I've got 2 here, I've got 22 here. Maybe I set this one to 12 or to 10, which gives me 14 left over. And I set this one here to 6 for some reason. And then over here coming out, I got 7. So I've set up some sort of stuff off of these that are doing things. This initial branch was set to 25. That 25 is going to be the active usage. It doesn't matter what I do after that. Anything I do after that is just down circuit of this original branch out that I set. So whenever you're, and again, the whole point here is that whatever active usage you have is what you need for root power. So in that particular case, I had 25. So 25 divided by 0.8 is 31.25. So call it 32. So I would need, if I were to have 25 rust watts of stuff coming out of any particular spot that registers active usage, I now need to make sure that I have 32 right here. So I could set this to 32. If this is all I have hooked up here right now, for now, let's say I've got this 25, it's pulling on this battery, but the battery's never going to go down because I set this to a little bit above the equivalence point of what 25 divided by 0.8 is. So by sending 32 to this battery, I now have just enough to keep that capacity from going down. It will never go down unless I can no longer, for some reason, supply the 32 rust watts that I need to send here. So let's say I expand my base a little bit, and now I've got, I don't know, let's say I've got 50 coming out of there. So now I've got 50. So this 32 that I'm currently sending here is now not enough. So eventually you can see it's starting to die right there. You can see the capacity is starting to drop, and that's because I've overwhelmed this minimum, requirement by adding things to my base that my battery can power because it has a max capacity or max output of 100 rust watts, but I don't have enough stuff coming in. So I'd have to redo this equation. So now I'd say 50 divided by 0.8 is 62.5. So if I were to set this to 63 now, let's say I changed it and I just updated the battery based on what I have, the active usage coming off of it. Now I have surplus power and it's slowly gonna go back up. The point is it's gonna stop going down because I have put just a little more than the equivalence point, which is 62.5. And so now the battery will stop dying and start going up. So what I think happens a lot is that people will add things to their bases, or they assume at any given point the root power they have is what they always have. But remember, windmills, I mean, they average, I don't know, 80 to 90-ish probably. And solar panels have a range from dusk till dawn. And so that amount you have has to be an average over one rust day. You must supply 63. So this is why doing things like power bank is better, because you can essentially have this stored up power that can absorb the flux so that this value coming out of here never drops, because as long as you have more than you can send, you'll always have exactly what you need. So for those of you who want to, be super efficient and you want to make sure that everything you're sending is correct, this is the way to do it. You can have some bank surplus of power, or just, which really just, there's really no way around it. Just some bank surplus of power that on an average rust day from, modded or not, whatever your server is, from rust dawn to rust dawn, you have to make sure that on average, you send at least 63 rust watts to this battery if it has an active usage 100. So, or a 50. So if I put 100 on there like that, there we go. That's the max output this battery can put out. But now you'll notice that it is once again draining, because currently I'm only sending 63.5 to that battery. And so with its 80% efficiency charging, in order to counter the load of 100 rust watts, you have to divide 100 by 0.8, and that'll give you 125. So you would set this to 126. So you want to just, again, add 1. So now if I look at it again, you'll notice that it stopped draining. The capacity is now, holding at 23,962 rust watt minutes, and it will slowly over time, because I'm barely above the equivalence point with one extra rust watt, it's going to slowly bring itself back up as the game ticks and registers the battery. So that is how you can really manipulate the active usage. That is how you can as your base is growing, you can say, well, I have a large battery, but I only have 2 solar panels and they put out a max of 40, so maybe they average 30 over the day. So I can use, up to something that needs a charge of 30. So, so what I'm saying? You can manipulate your power sources to fit what you have until you are wealthy enough in the game that you can simply just send each battery the max that it needs, so that you don't have to worry about it if you're, again, from the beginning, one of those people who doesn't care about the charge efficiency you're sending versus what's hooked up to it. So the final thing that I'm going to talk about is ways that you can, this is kind of like bonus material, that you can manipulate what you're doing. So like one example, for instance, that I'm going to take a splitter, and I'm just going to, well, I guess I'll put it over here. It doesn't really matter where I put it. I'm going to take a splitter, and I'm going to, instead of, you really would just, maybe get rid of this, but instead of running something out from here, I'm going to set this back to 2 so that I'm just using the pass through. So let's say I have the splitter, and let's just say I run to this splitter the full pass through of 97. So it's, going to end up with 32 and 32. Once, if I hook up things, it'll split it or whatever. And so right now you'll notice that the active usage is 3, and that's just because I have the 2 that the branch requires, and then I have 1 extra that this thing is using. So I've got three rust watts. And let's say I'm going to use regular switches. This would be exactly the same if you used a smart switch. It doesn't matter. So let's say I put 3 switches down here, and just plunk those down there, and then hook up real simple, real quick. I'm gonna just skip all my fancy wiring I normally do. I'm just gonna hook up these 3 switches, 1 to each output of this splitter here. There we go. So I got these 3 switches coming off, and if you go back over here and look, you'll notice that it's still 3 rust watts, even though we have these 3 switches. Why? It's because certain items will interrupt active usage, and when off, they don't register active usage. So the switch is one of them. The smart switch is the exact same thing. You don't have to, consider that. So let's say I was to grab two more turrets like so, and just plink these down here. And let's say I ran off of each one of these, I ran one of these to each turret like this. It's gonna be real bad, guys. I'm just gonna do this real fast, like so. And let's say I just ran, just these three off like that. So if I were to then, and again, this is not a good idea because you're sending a lot of extra stuff to the turret. This is more of just an example to give you an idea of what happens. With all this stuff hooked up, it's still only three active usage. So because these switches are blocking it. So if I turn on, say, 2 of these, it's going to register 2 of the turrets, the switch, and the splitter. And so now I have an active usage of 25. If I were to turn on a third one, now I have an active usage of 36 because it's the 3 turrets and the switches. And so if I were to turn off 2 of them, I now lose the active usage of 2 of them and their associated switches, and I'm down to 14. So the point here is that you can manipulate active usage using certain items. The timer is the exact same way. So and this is something I'm going to cover in a video here real soon. Let's say I was to take a non-branch out power source. Remember that, a non-branch out power source. So these are just examples. These are not valid circuits you would use, but you can use the concept of what I'm doing in your builds. So here we go. We have a timer. If I were to run this off of here, so now I've got a timer hooked up off of this power out here. So we'll go look at the active usage again. So you notice it's 3 again because it's registering the branch switch and the timer, but nothing after it. So if I were to say run this timer for 10 seconds, it's going to turn on that turret and it's going to register that active usage temporarily. You'll notice that as soon as the timer turns off, it's going to release the active usage back to 3 again. So this is a very, very powerful thing that you can do. I'm going to be dropping a video here soon about like a remote turret pod that runs off of very little root power because it only registers active usage when the timer is running. So it's the exact same thing with a blocker. If you were to hook up let's say you hooked up, this is actually a great way to show you this. If you were to say take a series of these, let's say I'm gonna just like put these here like this. Doesn't really matter, actually I don't really need 2. And then if I were to take a blocker and put that in line there, and then I was to run this into here, run the blocker into there, set this thing to say 50 even, that is gonna register all that active usage, 53, because the 50 I did, and then the switches. And so if you were to then say take out of some other power source and run that into the block pass-through to stop this blocker from passing power, you'll notice that now we're back to 3 again because I've blocked off. So the blocker, the timer, the switches, these will cancel active usage after them. So, and the idea being that you can hook up things to your battery that are in excess of its ability. So let's say this is, has a max output of 100. If you were to say set up a bank of things that cost 75 rust watts and then another bank that also costs 75 rust watts, that's 125 or 150 rust watts. It can't power that. But if you cut one of those banks off so that the active usage is not, the battery's not loading that stuff, you can share, larger amounts of capacity on one battery. So really, you're talking about, getting into like really complex and awesome circuits. I covered that in my sharing video, my power sharing videos. And then soon I'm going to drop that other video to show you how you can apply this to say like a turret pod or whatever. But that, folks, is just about all I've got. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Otherwise, you can get me on my Discord. See you later.